Hello and welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, where we delve into the minds of the experts shaping our skyline, the architects, designers, developers, and true masters of their craft. I am Katie Jensen. On today's episode, we hear from award-winning architect Brad Wilkins. He's worked on more than 100 projects all over the world and has over 50 international design awards under his portfolio. In fact, he helped design the iconic Burj Khalifa, the tallest tower in the world, and he was also responsible for creating the most energy-efficient skyscraper globally. That's located in China. He's also the principal architect on the all-new One residence located in downtown Dubai. We ask him just what went into creating these world-class structures, whether AI is threatening the future of architects around the world, and what the project is that he most regrets missing out on. This is Beyond the Blueprint. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today on Beyond the Blueprint. What a pleasure it is to have you as our guest today. Now, tell me, you have worked on more than 100 projects all over the world. You have more than 50 international design awards to your name. You worked on a huge number of skyscrapers too. But tell me, be honest, what is the project that you regret missing out on? What is the design opportunity that got away?
There's so many different projects out there that I could probably mention, but I never feel like I really miss any specific project, partly just because there's the right client and the right architect for every project. And so you really have to have a wonderful match between the two.
Okay, that's very politically correct, though. Let's be honest. This is a safe space. Tell me, what is the building that you would have liked to contribute to? What's one of the most iconic structures around the world that you would be proud to put your name to?
I'd probably go back to something that was more historical than something that was current, something like the Great Pyramids of Egypt or something like that. Just an amazing project that has had such an impact on an entire region and entire culture. Okay,
well, let's talk a little bit about more modern history. When we talk about iconic structures, it's difficult to get away from the Burj Khalifa. Of course, we are here in the heart of Dubai. Now, you worked on this project under Adrian Smith of SOM, but I understand even though you specialized in skyscrapers quite early on in your career, you weren't originally intended to work on this project. Tell me, how did that collaboration come around?
That's true. I actually was hired to work on skyscrapers in China. And as part of that process, at one point, there was a particular architect, a very amazing architect, and she had found out that there was a project in the office working on a specific hospital, a hospital that she had actually been in as part of as cancer treatment. And so she was just dying to get over onto that project. And so an architect swap actually happened, and I ended up on Burj Khalifa.
So tell me, what are the design features of the Burj Khalifa that you were responsible for? As we walk through this incredible structure, what can we look out for? What is the Brad Wilkins touch there?
Well, I'd say my mark is probably very small as one of many architects, but I worked on a lot of different places. I worked on the interiors. One of my favorites that I worked on quite a bit was the residential amenities. There's two different sets of them around the 43rd floor and the 76th floor.
Give me a specific example.
Like on those levels, there's indoor to outdoor pools. So actually designing about how you could swim from the inside to the outside and all the technical difficulties that came with that. There's a different air pressure at that height, and so the water levels are actually different from the inside to the outside. Little things like that. But I also worked on one of the smaller buildings at the base of the tower. There's a gym building, and so I worked on the inside and the outside of that.
Tell me, what are some of the unique features there as well? Again, when we talk about creating the world's tallest tower, it's a little bit different to your standard building in another part of Dubai as well. What were some of the unique things you had to think about, particularly, in this very warm, hot climate? What were some of the unique challenges that project brought you?
Well, there's a lot of them. And some of the things that we really learned about and that we know about as being specialists in tall buildings is how there's frankly a huge temperature difference from the top of the building to the bottom of the building, and you can take advantage of that. So the ability to take air in at high levels, which is much cooler than at the ground level, use that in the building. We did some really amazing things that we did because it was the right thing to do, like collect water, condensation on all the mechanical equipment, which today actually gathers millions of gallons of water that it can be reused for things like the planting and such outside. So there's a lot of different things, mostly technical things, but some wonderful things that really made it a special project for us.
I mean, because it's a fascinating project, isn't it? I think it's so unique, not only because of the incredible height, the fact that it's, 828 meters tall, but, it is an energy efficient building as well. It's won a number of awards as well. It has its own microclimate. What were some of the things that you really learnt consulting on that project?
I don't think we have enough time today, but there's many. I think the biggest one really was about collaboration, about really working closely with all the different consultants. There were so many different companies involved in this, and it was such a signature piece for people's careers. It's not an often experience that you get to work on the world's tallest building. Something that I really enjoyed was the fact that you learned how to do something different by taking the expertise of different people and making those right from the beginning and taking them so that you do something very, very unique and different.
What was it like working with Adrian Smith? Again, world-renowned architect as well. Did you have quite a close relationship with him? What's something that would surprise people if they knew about it?
What would surprise people? Yeah, I mean, I have a wonderful relationship. It's nice whenever I see him. The most recent time I saw him was actually when I was competing against him for a project in Shanghai, and I ran into him outside the conference room just after he'd presented, and it was fun to talk with him. I think the thing that I really learned from him was the challenge of really always looking for young people, giving them the tools to succeed, throwing them in the deep end, but making sure that there was a safety net there. I think a lot of people in every industry really want to look for people with a lot of experience and expertise. But throughout my entire career, I've been trying to pay that back, really look for young people, no matter their experience level, and give them the opportunity to show their brilliance, show their creativity, show their intelligence. And that can always be a challenge. It's not always easy to do that.
And it's that wonderful mix as well, isn't it, of youth and enthusiasm versus more age and experience as well. I think being able to come together on a project like the Burj Khalifa must be pretty special. Now, something that I was quite interested to discover, the Burj Khalifa, we know, is 828 meters high into the Dubai skyline, but it was originally designed to be about 700 meters. In fact, it wasn't until construction actually began, you'd actually broken ground several months earlier, that the team decided to come together and make the tower that much taller. Tell me, who was involved in that? How did it come about?
Those are things that sometimes happen between an architect and a client. Can't give you very many details on that, but I will say that a large part of that was not about making it a specific height or going to a certain degree, but actually making sure the building was right. Some of the things in the early stages, if you look at some of the early models, early renderings of it, it wasn't as elegant and as natural in its finish towards the top. And I think that Adrian and the team, we really looked at how to make it really elegant. And that included making that top taper a little bit more, taper a little bit longer, and that increased the height. And then, of course, there's always a little bit of a game when you're trying to keep the height secret, so that nobody knows how tall it is. There's always a competition between skyscrapers around the world for which one's the tallest. And so, there's great examples of that in history.
Now, you chose to specialize in skyscrapers quite early on in your career, even when you were at university. What really drove this interest and this knowledge in skyscrapers? Why is it that men are so obsessed with size?
That's a very good question. For me, it was a simple, fairly simple. I love the idea of complexity. I love the idea of bringing people together. I love the idea of community. To the point of that, I think I'm fairly unique within the architecture society. I'm a skyscraper architect who lives in skyscrapers. Over the last 2 decades, 90% of that time, I've lived in skyscrapers. I've lived in a 100-story building. Wow. I lived in the John Hancock in Chicago for almost a decade. And I really enjoy the kind of livelihood, the community that can be brought to those buildings. And I see a great future for them. I think it's one of the really amazing, incredible things that we can do. Even though we're not quite there yet, there's a lot more to do.
What are some of the different design functions that you need to think about when creating a skyscraper versus a more average size building?
That's a question that comes up quite a bit, actually. I think a lot of people just assume it's technical, that it's taller, that there's issues of wind pressure, of structure, and all these other things. But to be completely honest, as a design architect, I only deal with those tangentially. I have experts that I work with that are super knowledgeable in these things, and they're the ones that are required to understand that. I have to know enough to understand that we're going in the right direction and to make sure that all the different parts of the orchestra are playing the same music. But there's a whole nother level of designing skyscrapers that is a specialty that no one has to look after except for me. And that relates to the user experience. That relates to how it integrates into the city. It relates to how it integrates into the environment, and the ways that you move through it. And those things, if you look at them from a purely technical standpoint, can actually yield pretty bad skyscrapers, ones that are not that interesting and not that great of places to live in. So it's definitely a big challenge.
Okay, take me through the design process then. How does it all come together from that first pre-concept meeting with the client as well, up to when you get to present these incredible, wild, creative ideas, the meetings with the engineers where they say, no, we can't do that. That's not safe. That's not viable. Up until the handover. Walk me through that whole process.
Well, I think it's a little bit different for every architect. For me, you've got to really bring those engineers, for example, as you mentioned, up front. I want to make sure that we have all the experts at the table so that we can do something different and unique. If you try to do the architecture alone, just like you're saying, somebody's going to come in and say, you can't do that.
Yeah.
What I actually like to start with is when those experts are in at the beginning and they say, you know what, I actually see a potential here. I see something that you can do differently here that could be even better. And by bringing people to the table early on, you do that. But the design process also requires a huge amount of different inputs, and I think every project is slightly different based on the inputs that you need.
What's more important when it comes to creating a building? Is it form or function? It's that age-old debate.
It is an age-old debate, and I think that pretty much every architect has taken a stance on this and is either trying to do form or function. I think there's not a good solution to doing one or the other. Of course, if you're doing form, then you've changed the outside of the building to such a degree that it may impact the inside to not function as well for whatever you're doing, whether it's a residence or an office or a hotel or retail. The opposite is true too. If you purely focus on the inside, sometimes you're left with a building outside that's not very inspiring. It's not very artistic. It's not something that is good for a culture and a society. So I think a lot of the bad architecture out there is actually because architects struggle with that and they try to find a middle ground between the two, and sometimes they end up with things that are neither hot nor cold.
Yeah.
And they're just kind of gray. So what I like to do is actually find the intersection between the two, do both. And I think you can do that by investigating the space in between the function and that, and do something really creative. I think One Residences, for example, is a very good example of that, because the balconies are helping you create something that's incredibly beautiful, but at the same time, they're very functional and they help build on a very well thought out, well organized interior.
So tell me, where does your inspiration come from? You know, you referred there to One Residence. I think something that I really love about this project is that exterior. It brings that real softness that we don't always see in downtown Dubai. You look at those beautiful, rich, warm copper tones that I know probably take you back to your days. Of course, you grew up near the Grand Canyon and that incredible, rich landscape that must have been so close to you. And it's very, reminiscent of the incredible desert that we see in Dubai as well. So where does your inspiration come from today as a global citizen who's lived in so many places all over the world?
Well, and I think that's part of the key is, as a global citizen, as a global architect working internationally, one of the things that is, not one of the things, I'd say the most important thing is making sure that building is of its place, that it is really rooted in that community. So, for example, with that building, with One Residences, there's a huge tie of that color into, just like you're saying, the Dubai Desert Conservation Reserve is a huge inspiration. The wadis that are out at the edges of the Emirates, but also in other areas, the different soils, the colors in the water of the Gulf. Those things help tie it down. On the specifics of the way it looks, that one has an example of, we were really inspired by Al Saudi weaving, which is a indigenous way of making textiles throughout the region, and by art, by famous mid-century sculptors and such. And the idea that these type of overlapping patterns and such not only are part of the culture here, but an international legacy as well, but they also relate to geometries that are found in nature. And things with certain complexity and certain order and certain rhythms, like Fibonacci sequences, are things that are naturally seen as being very powerful and bring people joy, and that's been proven by science.
So walk me through the vision for this project. Again, One Residences has just launched, located in the incredible Burj Khalifa district. Now, construction, I think, in downtown Dubai began about 20 years ago. So when you're brought an incredible opportunity like this, and you're surrounded by all these other iconic architectural marvels, the Burj Khalifa, the Dubai Mall, how do you try and create something that's a little bit different when it comes to that luxury, high-end feeling? What was your vision for this project?
There's a few different things that we look at. The context is incredibly important. Looking at the buildings around, look at what's been done. Trying to be a respectful neighbor is, of course, incredibly important. At the same time, you want to be something that's different in the sense that you're unique, that you're memorable. I like to use the word remarkable, which is a little more than being memorable. It's something where you're worthy of being remembered. And then, of course, something vivid, something that has a clear visual identity. Those things coming together can help you be a little different, but at the same time be respectful of the neighborhood and be something that that people are proud to live in, and that people are proud to own, and that people are proud to be near.
Tell me, what are some of the unique features of the property that has made it so popular? Because today we are filming, alongside Jinko Properties as well. We're here at the Sales Centre for One Residence. It is packed outside there. We're at the launch recently as well. I think more than 1,000 people there. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in this property. It's very unique to downtown Dubai. We just haven't seen something like it. But for you, behind the scenes, what do you think are the most interesting features that have created so much interest amongst end users and investors?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's incredibly humbling to be involved in a project of that kind of stature, and I couldn't be happier for Jinko Properties and everybody involved. There's a wide range of people who've been involved. So it brings a smile, just that thought alone. The features of the building that make it so popular, it's not a secret sauce. It's something quite simple. It's really well-designed interiors. I mean, we have an amazing interior designer. We have amazing local architects. The layout of the spaces that we worked together on are extremely well planned.
Okay,
People will enjoy working in.
Specific examples, because I think everyone says my project's the biggest or the best, but for people who are not familiar, well, let's talk through the details a little bit. The interiors of this, high-end, beautiful, very much a Scandinavian feeling. The amenities there are incredible. Talk me through those specifics that you're really excited about.
Well, I think that's different. I mean, there's always. First, we start with the big picture. And the real big picture here was to increase people's interaction inside to outside. Okay. So we have a really amazing outdoor spaces on every level. That's something that you really can't do without. I mean, we've all learned in recent history how important it is to be outside, fresh air, and there's lots of research to back that up, and it's something that I'm absolutely passionate about, the connection to nature, the connection to the outdoors, and every little piece of it counts. So every single space that was designed inside and outside was with that in mind, with how to get people to interact with each other in a healthy way, to feel safe, to feel connected, in every single way, from the nature to that. So the outside has an amazing podium on it with a huge number of different opportunities and spaces, from things that you're you're used to having here in Dubai, like beautiful pools and places to barbecue, but to things that are a little bit different, things that can focus on families, like children's play areas. We have an indoor kids gym. We have a place for parents to sit and watch them. That kind of attention to detail to families and kids has been taken in a whole bunch of other ways. People who are professionals and living there maybe by themselves, people in families, young professionals, people in their mid-careers, all these different people. There's huge amount of amenities related to co-working and interacting throughout the entire building. But that happens both in the unit as well as within the amenities, the general spaces, the ground level.
Yeah, I think, your co-working lounge is incredible, and you have these amazing, very much Google-style pods as well. I haven't seen anything like that in Dubai, and I think the opportunities, I think that balance of relaxation, the yoga room, the music room, the children's playground as well. The fact you have an indoor trampoline park as well, I think is pretty special for people with young families who still want to be able to live in downtown Dubai as well. Now, I know sustainability was also really important. You were certainly an architect who really focuses on energy efficient, sustainable buildings. We mentioned earlier that you created the world's tallest skyscraper that's also, I think, zero energy, net zero as well, over in China as well. What were some of those design features that you brought to one residence?
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful climate for much of the year where you can go in and inside out. And then there's sometimes where it's a little bit more harsh. So dealing with that harshness was something that I understood. I've lived in hot climates in different places in the world. And there are ways to spend time outside. There are ways to be more comfortable inside. So one of the key components is the balconies. You'd think a balcony is just for aesthetics or just for sitting out on it, but it's actually also helping the building by shading the building. But beyond shading, it also helps change the way the wind moves around it. So when there's heavy winds, it can help turn them into breezes. Again, all these things are helping make the balcony spaces more comfortable. But then the second layer of that is by shading the glass itself, which we're doing in every single side of the building, top to bottom, is creating less heat gain. So it reduces the heat gain in the building by 10 to 30%, which is a huge impact on the comfort of the people inside. And of course, it means that you don't have to do as much cooling when it is hot. And it also creates a new connection to the outside because you don't have to close your blinds. It's very unique in that sense. I think most of the residential buildings here in Dubai, you have to close your blinds. This will allow you to keep them open because the sun won't be coming in directly, and you'll have a better view and a better connection to the outside.
And those incredible views downtown as well. Yeah. Now, we know One Broker Group is the exclusive sales partner for One Residence. Tell me, how does that kind of partnership elevate this property?
With every single project, we have a lot of different elements to it. I think with One Broker, we really found a great synergy of looking at how we were going to do the right type of product, the right type of residences, the right type of building, the right types of amenities. When we talk about some of the uniqueness, like you mentioned, the pods, we have podcast rooms, little rooms to work in or talk in a Zoom meeting inside of the amenities, for example. Now, that might have been an idea that me or my team brought to the project. But at the same time, we're also looking for ideas that are brought to us. So there's certain specific things to this market that with me working all over the world, I'm not going to know. And they are experts in it, and they can really bring those ideas to the table. And then we work and push back and forth and find ways, just like I was talking before, you get those experts in the beginning, you find opportunities and say, hey, we could do this, and this could be even better. If you're doing it in a silo, you never have those opportunities. So I think they were really great partners with us to make sure that we were doing something that was above and beyond what's been seen before.
So certainly important strategic alliance. We hear there might be more announcements later this year, so watch that space. I want to get your thoughts on some trends of the future. There's no getting away that AI has permeated every area of our life today, and architecture is another great example of that as well. We've seen programs like Midjourney, really making an impact on architecture, but of course there's big concerns that it could be threatening the future of architecture too. Do you think that we are seeing, potentially the end of traditional architecture because of AI? Is it a threat to the creativity of people like you today?
This is a wonderful topic. I'm very passionate about this, and there's several different things we could talk about here. I think one, is it the end to the profession as we know it? Absolutely, because things are changing. We have to take advantage of it. Is it the end of creativity? Absolutely not. And we could individually talk about either of those. From my personal viewpoint, I use AI every day, but I don't use AI to create these wonderful interactions and the beautiful things that we can do. What I do is it helps me with the things that are more mundane, that take up my time. It frees up my time. For example, I think one of the places the architecture industry is going is using AI and intelligence to help us look more quickly at our design, to understand where we're making mistakes related to certain codes, safety issues, things like that, which are absolutely important. And there are individuals in my profession who dedicate their entire career to that. But that by doing that, it actually restricts them from spending more time on the creative part. By having that more ingrained into our process, and by doing it through computers and artificial intelligence and many other things, we're actually bringing it away into the project to free up and actually be more creative.
So you don't believe that we're at risk of, loss of authenticity, of creating these very similar ChatGPT style, rather soulless buildings?
I don't. But at the same time, one of the other topics that I find very interesting about AI in architecture is the ability to bring more design through AI, the creative part even, to people who have no access to it. One of the conversations that my wife and I talk about is, she's also an architect, is about the fact that there's a lot of people who don't have access to good design. And even though AI is a long way off from creating brilliant design, the idea that a single mother on the south side of Chicago who doesn't have the access to architects, and even though there are many architects donating their time, could have AI help her design a better kitchen so that she has more good design in her life, even if that's not top level, and that's kind of average level that AI can give you, that's still a huge improvement in people's lives. And I think all architects would be in favor of whatever can help improve the quality of design in people's lives.
Okay, so inclusivity, accessibility is going to be really important, the growth of AI. What about 3D printing? We're seeing in places like Dubai, I think they've just printed 3D printed the world's first mosque that has been 3D printed. What do you think about that?
That's happening around the world. I've been involved at a few of the companies that I've been at in my history with 3D printing of buildings, and it's interesting. I mean, 3D printing in the most general sense has blown up over the last 20 years because there were some patents that were not allowing us to really do it. We use 3D printing in many different parts of our daily work as architects. I mean, I have a 3D printer that I build models of study models to quickly get things out of the computer. As an industry, 3D printing for buildings, what we see is related to concrete. That has some use, but it's not as useful. I think there are some other types of 3D printing that's quite interesting. There's some aeronautical industries that are actually 3D printing composite metals that have different flexibility. I'm really interested on what that will have on the impact of steel columns, for example. You can have it be more appropriate for the skyscraper and not as heavy.
And that's the thing. And I think we've seen such an interesting change in development materials over the years, steel being developed, being able to create these skyscrapers, glass production, big changes as well, changing how we design the facade of buildings. I think 3D printing is having a big impact on that as well. Of course, another big concern and consideration, I think, for architects today is our changing weather conditions we're seeing around the world. We all know sea levels are rapidly rising. And because 90% of global cities are based on the coastline, it is really going to affect our communities in the coming years. Now, there's a fascinating project taking place in Busan in South Korea at the moment. They are creating a floating city. Construction is going to begin later this year and being finished by 2028. Do you see them really as our last hope for civilization? Are they realistic? The South Korean project is expected to accommodate about 10,000 people. Or are they still very much a science fiction dystopian fantasy that just overlooks the huge structural challenges and societal issues that we face?
I think I I'm a bit of a dreamer, so I like to go for the fabulous. I like to challenge all the people that I work with. I think bigger. So to that specific project, will it function? Will it not? I think time will only tell. But I do feel that we do have a huge concern about the change of the world. I mean, the world's always changing, and it's continuing to change. And the fact that we need to deal with it is something that we need to be more able to work on. One of the hats that I wear, I've been a design leader for urban design throughout my career as well. And the idea of how do you deal with this, I think, starts at the city. And I think it's really important for cities, for governments to really consider how to do this and engage it, because sometimes architects' hands are tied. They don't have much they can do if there's not a system. We need more architects who are advocates for doing the right thing. We need more urban designers who are advocates for doing the right thing. And there are bright spots throughout the world that are dealing with these things well. I mean, Singapore, a city that I worked in, has a really great history of dealing with that. And every new building is raised up. And eventually they'll raise the roads to match that height level. It creates some really interesting moments of how do you change levels in the meantime. But there are wonderful examples, and I have no doubt that we'll be able to meet every challenge that the environment's going to throw at us.
Do you think governments are ready to take on the additional costs of doing something like that, particularly when we look at developing nations around the world? There's still that big split between the haves and the have-nots.
There is. And that's a very good question. And there's a lot of people who are much more intelligent than me dealing with that exact problem right now. I would say that from my viewpoint, I'm highly involved in the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, where I'm one of their leaders. And every conference that we have is talking about these type of things. And we've seen a huge shift in the amount of people showing up to our educational conferences, from just being professionals like myself and structural engineers to being a huge amount of cities, of governments, of educational universities, professors, because I think people are realizing how important that is and how it needs to happen everywhere, not just in the most developed of cities.
Final question. When we consider you are a global citizen, you have worked in a dozen cities from Asia to Europe and far beyond. You've been visiting the Middle East, I think, for several decades now as well. Where do you see the greatest threat to urban architecture today? And what do you think are the biggest changes we're going to see that will affect how we live in our built environment of the future?
That's a good question. The greatest threat. I'm such a hopeful person. I feel that there are so many. I mean, there really are. It's pretty easy to just pull up the news and find them. Water rising was a huge one that you already brought up. It's hard to pinpoint one. I think that every single architect, designer is passionate about tackling at as many of them as they can. For me, it's about energy. Mm-hmm. I mean, our usage of energy is skyrocketing. I mean, there's wonderful transitions to electric cars and other things like that. But even AI that we just talked about, the massive amount of use of energy is exploding. Mm. So the ideas of how do we do that more effectively, more efficiently, buildings are a huge user of energy. So it's my passion to bring down the usage of energy in every single way, from passive ways like the balconies and the shading of one residence to trying new ways of making buildings not only not use energy, but be positive energy, batteries that can actually help create power for these other things that are using it. Because I don't see us turning around. I see energy usage going up and up and up, and it could be a huge problem if we don't tackle it with the same type of aggressiveness as we are, for example, developing AI.
Well, certainly some huge challenges for architects just like yourself, I think, for decades to come. Brad, a couple of quick fire questions for you. Get comfortable. I'm going to ask you to answer these in about 10 seconds or less. Describe yourself in one sentence.
Passionate about the environment and architecture.
Right. What is the best and worst part of your job?
Best part is working with people.
Okay.
The worst part is not being able to go out there and actually build the buildings with my own hands.
What advice would you have given yourself at the start of your career?
Listen to people you trust. I think I've gotten great advice along the line.
What skills would you like more young architects to have today?
More confidence in themselves and what they can do.
At what point in the project do you celebrate?
Oh, it's such a process. I don't know. I think that's probably the hardest one to answer. There's so many wonderful mile markers.
Okay, tell me, how do you celebrate?
With my family.
Okay. With your wife who's an architect?
My wife and my children, yes.
Discussions around the table about how to create these buildings?
Always. She's my biggest support and, frankly, the better designer in the family.
Oh, well said. You answered this a little bit before, but tell me, what was the best era in architecture?
There's so many. 10 seconds. Oh, you're killing me. I would say the best era, there is no best era because there's been brilliant architects at every point in history.
Okay, I'm going to make you answer that question, though. Tell me about a couple of the highlights.
I really love what Indigenous people have done. I love the fact that there were brilliant people with none of the tools that we have now, making sustainable, energy efficient, regenerative buildings. And that's happened in every single environment throughout the world.
Which building in Dubai would you like to tear down and build again from scratch?
I'll give my short answer, which is one that I learned from my mentor, Adrian Smith, which is don't tear it down, just let ivy grow over it.
I like that. Will AI improve or destroy architecture?
Both.
Mm-hmm. Finding that balance will be key. And finally, if you were given one final building to design, what would it be and why?
I've always wanted to design the world's tallest building.
Okay. I know you're working on a big project in Saudi, so not too dissimilar. Well, Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. What a pleasure to have you here as part of the One Residence team. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Beyond the Blueprint. This podcast is proudly brought to you by the One Broker Group. Don't forget to follow us on social media. All of the details are on the screen. And for now, from the entire team here, it's goodbye.